I've been procrastinating for a while, but I have what follows this introduction is a talk. It's about an hour and 20 minutes of sort of an edited conversation I had with a friend, Richard Southwell, who is a uh, mathematician in the UK and interested in sort of higher level abstract math and making it accessible to non mathematicians and in an interdisciplinary sort of way. And so we've been in touch for a good part of this year. And I think sort of imagining, early on, like when all the craziness was happening, I kind of had this framing that we need to tell a better story. Like that there are there's a better story out there, and we need to be telling a better story. And I think even when I said that, I didn't know what the better story was. I didn't really have a good idea of what a better story might be, but I knew that it seems like we live inside narratives, and um, that offering a reasonable story that was optimistic was important. And so, yeah, so we're sort of imagining uh, how there might be some sort of symbolic infrastructure that could help us to get to a better story, explore better stories, that's grounded both in the arts and humanities and in higher level abstract mathematics in a way that was accessible and embodied and fun. And so tentatively, we're sort of imagining this project maybe as something called Playcat Geo. With cat standing in for category theory and geo being like geometry. Richard is a geometer, and also sort of geography or geomancy or the earth, because we're here in 3D space-time in the earth space. And I sort of imagine now Richard's working in a new area that's being explored by Norman Wildberger, who's another mathematician, called like box arithmetic, where things are in squares. And so I sort of imagine, if you can imagine a cat who's playful, his name is Geo, and he's in a box. And so we're sort of imagining that as a vision for coming up with sort of a new social system languaging stuff. And yeah, we're exploring that now. We're exploring that space. And so that's part of what we talk about in the conversation that follows. And just for context, I want to mention, I'm in Hot Springs. There's definitely a lot of folks in sort of the more metaphysical energy healing aspect, which is something that I didn't arrive with that forefront in my plan, but I've realized it's actually taught me a lot, and I've been able to find a way of holding this information in a way that really feels comfortable with sort of developments in this higher level math and geometry, like the E8, with social systems computation and quality of computation, with the idea of topology as grid coordinates that may apply to consciousness, and the idea that we may be, eternal patterns, instances of eternal patterns that would be coordinates, like information, organized information, or information, harmonics. And so part of that, I've been really interested in process philosophy, and one of the people I spent some time with over the past year was Arthur Young, who studied process philosophy, spent the early part of his career inventing the Bell helicopter, and then moved on with his second wife to work in areas of telepathy and psi and consciousness. And his autobiography is called Nested Time, and he spent a good part of the later part of his life focusing on learning astrology and applying it, because he had kept very specific detailed journals of his life as both personal journals and then scientific and business journals. Had a lot of documentation that he had access to. And so he went back and mapped transits of key moments in his life and key individuals in his life and saw how it all laid out. And the book is interesting because it has sort of a wide margin, and then in that margin are these different diagrams. And so, yeah, there's quite a few people in Hot Springs who do astrology. And I've had people in the past, I'm kind of an oddball. So I've had people be like, I'd like to look at your chart. Maybe there's a way to better understand where you're coming from if I could see your chart. And, but it never really, it was tricky about, like, I don't know, for some reason, a friend last week, uh, I never actually gotten the chart, like a paper chart. And I could have, they're free online, but I don't know why I never did. But actually, because I didn't have the exact birth time, and this person also does dowsing. And so I had an hour, but I didn't have the specific minute, and this person could like douse. And I trust their ability in that. So we got a specific time and I got a specific chart, and I kind of compared it with the solstice because I have some stuff coming up around the solstice. And, one of the big things that came out of it, it really helped situate sort of the upheaval in my life. And I'm new to a lot of this, but there's, sort of the axis, right? The rising, the rising sign and descending sign, and then the north and south nodes. And in my chart, my north node is the anuretic degree, which is like 29 degrees. It's getting ready to go over into the next sign between Pisces and Aries. And then the southern end of that axis, that node, the southern node, is in Libra. And the person, I had never really understood it this way, but like the first 6 signs are sort of about the individual, like individual identity. And then the other 6 are more the collective in society, or how one relates in society. And so essentially, the gap between Aries and Pisces is sort of the 12th, the final sign of sort of deep spirituality, and then Aries is the sort of arrival sign of the me, the coming in this. So that's a major transition from the last sign of Pisces back into Aries and starting the cycle again. So having something on the degree right before that transition is very powerful. And I have Chiron is the planet that's in that spot, and then on the southern node, it's in Libra. The northern node is sort of, and again, this is my understanding, is sort of what you're here to learn and work through. And then the southern node is sort of your comfort space and sort of where you're situated. And so that is in Libra. And around that, there's a whole stack of planets, but like Jupiter and Uranus and Pluto are all in that sort of space. And so initially looking at that, my friend, and then I have a whole bunch of planets from Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius, including my sun sign. And Mercury is sitting on top of my sun. They're totally conjunct. And Mercury is intellect, but it's also the mythological character of Mercury and Hermes are these boundary crossers and commerce. And so the Chiron being at that anuretic degree, and then with the balancing out in Libra, which is sort of the first collective sign, is like the wound that the Chiron is the wounded healer. The wound there is not just a personal wound, but like a social level wound. And it's sort of like the primordial deepest wound, which is separation, right? If you imagine the fall, or if you want to reimagine the fall as, being a part of the fractal of Indra's net, right? That we're a part of the all, but then we're this individuated piece that's looking back. And when we are here, it's the process is re-remembering who we are, like re-remembering that connection, re-bridging. And it's interesting because Richard actually was able to visit in Hot Springs a couple months ago, and we went on a hike in Petit Jean State Park, and there was a small natural bridge, and we placed a heart there, and I said, I think what we're trying to do is bridge into these higher dimensional spaces. And so you can imagine that the all, there's infinite ways and stories that you can tell cosmologically about us and being integrated or disintegrated in with the all. But you could conceptualize it as higher level informational physics or mathematical space, or crystalline space. And like, how do we bridge back? How do we, as a society, as a social structure, which is the Libra part, how do we get reconnected there in a way that is meaningful and productive and creative and expansive? And I feel like that's the better story to tell right now, as opposed to like end times dystopia. Pack it all in. This is all done. We're going, and it could be we're going home, but I don't think that the 3D space-time stuff is up. I think there's way more to discover. And so in order to discover the next step, it's like, how do we have a new infrastructure of communication that is abstract, expansive, embodied, collective, networked, resonant. There's lots of different things that can come into that space, and trying to hold space because we don't know exactly what it looks like or what the possibilities might be. And so, like, I don't want to overshare, but for me, this what I've been going through, like, since 2020, and the profound separation from my old life, and again, not I totally own that, like, I'm not a perfect person. I have lessons to learn. But the level of separation that was the curtain that was drawn down felt unreasonable and illogical until I saw this chart, and I'm like, oh, separation. That's your theme. That's what you're here to learn. And my Saturn return, and yeah, this is the thing. So how do we hold it? And like with the Sagittarius energy, how do we hold it in an exploratory, optimistic way? Like the depth of Scorpio, because I have a lot of planets in Scorpio, but then also optimism. And yeah, and I'm so part of it is I'm trying to tell this, like, hold the heavy stuff, because there's a lot of heavy stuff, but then have the arrow pointed out towards an optimistic outcome. And one of the other elements, because there's some dwarf planets in this, including one called Maki Maki, and I understand that dwarf planet is named after a mythology of Easter Island that was post-colonization and removal of lots of natural resources, that the people of that island had a very close connection with the natural spirits of that island and of Maki Maki, to that they were able to restore it and regenerate that island very quickly. And so that to me is sort of the story of, it's sort of the Findhorn Deva story, but on Easter Island, the Paralandra story. But in this case, it's interesting because it's in the house of Leo. And so Leo, the lion, and lion is a cat, and Leo is also playful. And it's in my chart, it's the second house, which is a finance. And so, for quite a few years in researching the Web3 tokenomic space, I had a really skeptical and dark understanding of what regenerative finance was going to be. And it felt very controlled, and again, that is one story. There's reasons that you could tell that story. There's a lot of facts and figures there. But the Leo part, the play part, to me feels like a hat tip to this playcat geo idea, that how can we playfully communicate with the divine aspects of nature, which could be represented through crystallography, through harmonics, through mathematical frequencies, and do it in a way that's fun and responsive and co-creative, because that's what Maki Maki represents. And so I want to share that aspect and just say, apologies, because like this intensity of this anuretic degree with Chiron and the wounded healer and this deep spiritual wound, if I didn't know it at the time, but I was driven by this level of intensity because I felt like I really had to fix it. And what I'm realizing now is maybe I don't have to fix it for the world. I just have to find a story that can fix it for me. And in fixing it for myself, that resonance goes out into the world, hopefully in a good way. So it's less overwhelming, and it helps really make sense of things for me. But I also have this Priapus planet that's next to my sun and Mercury, and also Demeter. And so Priapus, his cosmology was he was cursed by Hera when he was in utero in Aphrodite, and he came out, and I think he was somewhat disfigured, but he had essentially a perpetual heart-on, a very large penis, and but could never actually perform. And so there was this intensity there, but it wasn't actually delivering. And so, hopefully I'm going to find my way through that. But it is I think part of my pattern to be really intense about something and not really understand how to make the connection, like make it happen, to birth the next thing. And so I'm not giving up, but it is in that space of like, okay. The other interesting thing about Priapus is he is the patron of gardens, so that does actually resonate with the regenerative finance and merchant. Sailors. So commerce again, same with Mercury and commerce, interdimensional commercing. And it made me think a while back, I came across a paper that said essentially that the Polynesian cultures would be appropriate for space exploration, air quotes, and because they had a very widely dispersed culture that retained coherence, and they had this ability with long distance navigation. And one of the aspects of the navigation, beyond simply being very attuned to natural forces and weathers and signs and signals and waves and stars, was that often the men would sit on the boats and essentially follow the tugging, testicular navigation, right? It was like the avian magnetoreception in birds, is that they had an ability to access the magnetic field in terms of navigational purposes. And I think if you can imagine that maybe space is math and coordinates and with an electromagnetic property, maybe there's some bonus sides to Priapus with the garden and the mariner's commerce. Maybe that's part of this Playcat Geo, is how do we navigate through the field with all of our various abilities. So so that's sort of what I'm working with. And I know that might seem a bit off-putting to some people. Like I said, I didn't come into this with astrology, but the more that I've been sitting with process philosophy and Arthur Young and understanding the mathematical nature and thinking about us as patterns, I can't deny that there seems to be a lot of resonance here. And so I'm really excited to explore this new space. I had someone here visiting today, and we're trying to be like, what's next? What do we do next? And I said, I don't know. It's we do the next right thing. And I came from, my South Node is in this Libra, and sort of people pleasing, right? And planning and being prepared. And I said, I'm overcoming in my attempts towards like an Aries positioning, which the North Node is actually in Aries, is like how to lean into my gut instincts and to move forward and not have everything planned out. Because the other planet that's right next to the North Node is Eris, who is essentially the goddess of sort of the chaos agent, but also someone who's profoundly there for justice. And that's the same with the Libra, is wanting things to be fair and right. So that's a core part of me, and that's what led to my life being so changed, was following that path, but following it to an end that was very intense, but ultimately counterproductive, until I found a way to flip the story, right? Look at the bottom of the puzzle blocks and find a way through. And I think that's one of the things I said in the Gene Keys, is working through hunger and impatience and catalyzed by fear into a space of boundlessness and miraculous wormholes. So I feel like I'm looking for the miraculous wormhole. And then once we get that down as a language, how do we use it to have a better co-creative relationship with this cosmic energy that we're here to be in service to? And so I'll just close with this. My garden is, once you get 2 or 3 weeks of like the high heat and humidity, there's so many things that are just kicking in. They're really abundant and glorious. I had my first couple of caprese salads. I have these like, I don't know, I have about a dozen different kinds of tomato plants. The one, I finally have a red one from this Korean long tomato, which has very, very spindly little leaves and vines, but the tomatoes are really hot. They're almost like San Marzano, but even beefier than that. And it's quite a juxtaposition. So yeah, I've been enjoying the tomatoes. And what I want to say is when I'm talking about the eye gazing back to the divine, and in that sort of reflective relationship, I have this big plant. This is its second year, and it's a native plant, and it's a kind of mountain mint. And we had it at Bartram's Garden, and I really loved it. And I was a little worried last year. I put it in. It was like just a little quart, not even bigger than a plug, but it was not very big. It was like little. And these mountain mints are not supposed to be runners like regular mint. They're supposed to, they'll get to be a certain size, but they should stop. And I was like, is it going to stop? It keeps getting bigger. And so, yeah, so it seems like it's about 3 feet across and 3 feet high, but it seems like it's kind of hit its maturity. And it's very fragrant. You can use it in tea. You shouldn't do it too much because I think there's some alkaloids or something in there. You shouldn't drink it all the time, but every once in a while, it's very beautiful, strong mint flavor. And then the tops turn into these bracts, which are, the leaves are darkish green, medium to dark green. And then the bracts are a light green to cream and white. And then they have very small, maybe dime-sized heads with a few little pink and purple flowers, but they're very discreet. But they must be packed with nectar because they are a pollinator magnet of all the plants in my yard. And I remember this from Bartram's Garden. That's why I wanted to have one in my garden. Is that all the native bees? And so, like, I know sometimes people are really frustrated with the idea of bees and colonies. A lot of the native bees are solitary bees. Like, they're definitely their own thing. And so I would say there's probably like 20 different, there's honeybees on there, but different kinds of wasps, different kinds of little tiny bees. I mean, many, and you can just watch them on the top, and they're just swarming, and they're so happy. And I just feel like, I don't know, in my chart, I can't remember if it's the 5th house, the one about love, and it was sort of like passionate and this and that, and I'm like, I'm just not seeing it. Like, I mean, I'm not really looking for it, but I'm not really, and I'm thinking, oh, it's not a person. It could be my garden, right? Is my beloved being, and it is giving to me abundantly. It is giving me this abundance that I really crave, and unconditional love, right? And joy and beauty. And so seeing this as this manifestation of abundance and love and just energy, just vital energy, and the dance between the pollinators and the flowers. And I feel like, and none of the bees, they're all different kinds, and nobody's bothering anybody else because there's enough. It's boundless, right? It's a miraculous boundlessness of enough, plenty, and beauty. And that's where I think, like, that's where I want to hold that space. I want to hold that tone for that future, in which the divine offering of nectar is appreciated by the pollinators, and the pollinators caress the divine surface of the mountain mint. And it's just this energetic, crystalline version of like loving energy. And so just keep that in mind when I talk a little bit about the eye gazing with the divine. To me, like, you could also look at my mountain mint, and it would be, macro, micro, the infinite cosmos down to my little garden. And so anyway, so I really appreciate Richard taking up the opportunity to talk with me about all of these big ideas. And it's been really wonderful to meet and work with somebody who has a framework that is complementary but very different, because that's how we grow, right? Is that we can find this common point, which is something that he talks about in these different kinds of topos theory or whatever. Instead of it this or that, it's like, how do they blend? And I feel like we're starting down this road, and there's going to be a road trip coming up, and we have a few other people interested. And on the one hand, it would be nice to like plan everything out, but on the other hand, we're just going to see how the magic happens. And I think it will arrive because it should. It should. So anyway, enjoy the conversation, and I'm sure Richard and I, and perhaps some other participants in PlayCat Geo, will be engaging in further conversations about this better story and how we might get there through embodied harmonic mathematics. Yeah, so do you want to rehash a few of the major themes yesterday, or you want to launch into the new stuff, what you're thinking about with boxes?
I think what we were talking about yesterday was pretty interesting and kind of leading to what was considered today.
Okay, so the main themes that I'm thinking about are ingression, the E8 as sort of being a base layer, informational systems, Indra's net kind of thing, if that makes sense. And just for people who don't know anything about what we're thinking about, like, so there's some aspect of the E8 that's like a bigger base that's projecting in some way into our reality. And there's a conversation, like a Pasquian kind of conversation in which the computational geometric structure of the all, that we in this reality have a dance or a conversation or exchange that involves symbolic communication and realization of sort of building out from maybe mutual co-arising reality. I don't know. Would you say it differently?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it differently.
You're allowed to. We have the very different perspectives. So, and in case people
Yeah,
don't know, Richard is the abstract math side of the equation, and I'm the quirky symbolic art side of the equation.
I guess it's like, what are we trying to do?
For people who don't know anything
What
about like
what I
why
mean
we
is
would
like,
build a playcat geo
are we
thing.
trying to like we can talk about like different models of reality?
Part of what we would be working on as a collective mind or exploration is how we relate to how this reality that we're inhabiting relates to maybe a deeper structure,
Yeah,
and that it's a
like
dynamic system somehow and how that works.
I guess this is going to end up appearing on your channel. So I was going to kind of say that I feel like for me,
Hmm.
what we've been talking about over the last few months has had quite a lot to do with reality, or
Hmm.
at least a model of reality or something. And yeah, I think that's an interesting place to start for me, because I think that having spoken to you over these last few months has changed my idea of what reality is probably like to some degree.
Well, and a lot of people talk about it like consciousness. Is consciousness fundamental, or is it conscious, or does it have a soul? Or there are certain things that are thought forms that hold larger attentions or certain frames. Okay, the frame is consciousness fundamental or is it not? Or is a machine conscious or is it not? And I
Mm,
think when I came across your work, the projective geometry and the category theory, and just starting to work on the Lie algebra stuff for me a little bit because I'm
yeah,
not a math person, and seeing this idea of the E8, which could you maybe briefly say from a math side,
yeah,
like
because I think I think this was, yeah, this was sort of a bit of a intersection of interest that we had earlier on, I guess, is this E8 stuff. So for me, I sort of started out doing kind of ordinary applied maths, and then I got into category theory, which is kind of abstract, and it has to do with thinking about composition and sort of how can we put processes together to make bigger processes, or all sorts of things. You can attach structures together to make bigger structures, but it's a very sort of abstract math. But then I kind of wanted to get back to something a bit more basic, which would be something like to do with geometry,
mhm.
or I really like these kind of shapes and things. And in a way, I think that there's something about this kind of E8 idea, which I would
What do mathematicians say the E8 is? Don't they say it's the most beautiful, sophisticated object in math? Like that's kind of
yeah,
its.
yeah, like it stands for like exceptional, an exceptional structure. So quite a lot of maths is to do with studying things that you find in lots of places, right? Like we find numbers in lots of places, so we study them, or circles, very common. Then there are these exceptional structures, which are just, especially this E8 one, basically when people really started to understand a lot about geometry, they were like, okay, let's classify everything. And they expected to find all these building blocks. And then they found this E8 thing, which they're like, who ordered that? You
And
know,
what
it's
does
like
the
some
eight
huge.
stand for? Is it 8 dimensions? Eight
Yeah, I
planes?
mean, it has something to do with 8 dimensions. It's sort of realized in 8 dimensional space. So a fast definition of it would be that it's some kind of crystalline structure
Hmm.
in 8 dimensions, that the shape and the symmetries of it are supposedly reflecting the laws of physics, or so some people think. There's
Okay.
this Lacey Garrett paper, An Exceptionally Simple Theory of Everything, where he was basically saying, well, if we look at the symmetries involved in fundamental physics, it's interesting that this embeds in this symmetry that we get from this E8 structure. So you could say that it's like a geometric structure. So I'm quite obsessed with making these all these kind of models of things in geometry, and a lot of these have geometry that sort of somehow can be derived from this E8 structure. But just to say a very nerdy thing, which I hope won't confuse people, what E8 really is, to me, is it's this kind of graph structure. So in some weird way, if you have these 8 dots and you know that they're linked up in this particular fashion, and you kind of know how to decrypt it, it can sort of tell you how you can cook up this crazy 8-dimensional crystal thing that supposedly explains lots of things.
Well, is it sort of like one of those capsules that you put in water and then it grows into like a giant sponge or something, like something that's very compressed?
Like
You've got this thing, and then if you open it up, it's like whoa, stop! Like you can't contain it; it gets so big.
Yeah. It's like each of these dots would represent like a mirror in 8 dimensions. And then somehow the way it's connected up is like telling you about the angles between the mirrors. So there's like some crazy kaleidoscope in 8 dimensions that this tells you how to build. Yeah, it's pretty wacky.
Part of what's so interesting, and I appreciate you being open-minded about it, is the mirror side of things. So,
Right.
My name is Allison. It technically means little Alice. I make these maps. And it's interesting because some people talk about it like constellating, which in some ways is sort of a symbolic phenomenological equivalent to the math side of things, of the dots and the connections and the compressed information. And so Lewis Carroll, or Charles Dodson was his actual name, wrote Through the Looking Glass, which is the mirror piece. And, the world gets all different on the other side of the glass and the mirrors, how the mirrors work with space. But Lewis Carroll was also part of the Society for Psychical Research back in the late 19th, early 20th century, when the high-level thinkers and politicians in the United Kingdom and other parts of the world were interested in essentially communicating with, they would say the dead, but really it's other informational spaces. If you imagine us perhaps as being eternal patterns, that they were trying to connect with sort of mathematical structures on outside of our normally understood reality, and pursuing that in a very scientific way. And so Lewis Carroll was a mathematician and a logician, logic, and he also developed this idea of liquid democracy, which I can see as we move into this
I don't know
idea.
anything about
Yeah. So the
democracy.
liquid democracy is essentially ways of applying a vote to something. I'm trying to remember if the liquid democracy is if you have an agent vote on your behalf, or if there's quadratic voting and liquid democracy voting, but it's an aspect of, like, say you have 10 dots. I think this is the quadratic, and they say, okay, here's a room full of poster papers of ideas of what we want to do in our town. And there's 20, and then you've got 10 dots, and you can distribute your dots however you want. You could put all 10 on one idea because you really like it, or you can put 1 on 10 or whatever, and at the end we'll find a pattern. And it's liquid, it's a flow state. And so there's a sense of governance that is built into logic and math. And then also this, quote unquote, they called it psychic. But if you understand it if you used a lens of informational theoretic lens, so to speak, maybe our conception of reality is made of mathematical structures that are informational and organized in different ways, that you could essentially, through collective governance, somehow have a conversation with a higher dimensional information field that would resonate down into your perceived reality. The governance is saying, our preference is this. And so later, what we could talk a little bit about the concrescence and the Whiteheadian aggression. At some point, we've talked about choose your own adventure games. You get to a choice architecture, that's part of it. Do you go this way or that way? And then if you had some sort of a fluid collective voting, whether it's a slime mold or a pyrosoma or a town, you sort of collectively come to a consensus, which is where the tokens come. And then they're like, okay, we're all going to page 148 and then do that adventure. And then there'll be another choice. And then we're sort of steering through information but the structure of the book might relate to some of these mathematical lattices or geometric
Oh,
lattices, right?
interesting.
So there's a structure that's provided, but it could be,
So
my
like
sense
there
is
would
that
be
it's,
like some kind of network with maybe multiple options,
yeah,
and then many people are making choices, and it's kind of like pouring some kind of dye into some organ or something
right.
and
Well, the
seeing the
Moniac,
structure.
right? Do you want to say something about the Moniac? Did you ever go?
I
You
never
haven't
saw
gone
the
yet?
Moniac. You've been telling me to see the Moniac.
You
I
gotta
think,
go. Before you come, you have to go pay homage to the Moniac so we can connect it to the
well,
other, the Mississippi
if I'd
River.
seen the Moniac, I could describe it. But I think, yeah, it's like a machine.
It's an
It's like
analog.
something to do with
So
water, right?
there's this difference between digital and analog, which I
Hmm.
think is an important part of this new kind of, or not new, but the approach you're taking to math and how people commonly understand information processing happening in a digital system. The digital systems of ones and zeros that are sort of silicon based are, they can't actually be random, right? Just pseudo random, is that correct? But living organisms or living systems have a randomness that are, it's squishier. Like instead of a one or a zero, if you imagine a zero being white and a one being black, and there's a gradation. Living systems can kind of live in that in between space. This Pantone
Yeah,
color shade of gray. And so there's like a sweet spot in there that has a different kind of flexibility. It may be a little slower, but it has affordances that aren't available in the digital space. And so with the Moniac, I'm trying to remember the time frame. It might have been the 50s.
it was pretty early, wasn't it,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
its
It's like
time?
they modeled the British economy, and essentially it looked like the size of a phone booth, an old fashioned stand up phone booth, that sort of proportion. And it was full of pipes and locks and levers and things. And it was all linked to like interest rates and income and inflation. And they could tweak different control knobs, and then the water would flow through it in different ways. And it was actually a direct correspondence to how the actual economy or how we perceive the actual economy working. So it was a
Yeah,
fluid, this fluid analogy of flow is so important in all of this, but it's a totally different kind of computing. And eventually we're going to, I think, get around to the fact that possibly our experience of reality and ecosystems and social systems might be fluid and computational at some higher dimensional level that we're not even fully aware of. Possibly, if we could
yeah,
find a game that we could govern ourselves, we could be in a better conversation or a more agentic conversation with higher level information fields that are math or geometry. But we actually have to get the chops of learning a language and learning the parts, the rules of the game to have the good conversation. So we're at one stage of conversing. It's like baby talk. I think this next phase is how do we get to the next phase of doing it? But it may not just look like a computer that lives in a screen. It may be way more biological or some combination of
yeah,
biological and silicon. The silicon does what it does, which is hold information and find patterns. But we forage and have conversations with the field, with the lattice and get epiphanies or understandings sitting in a shoe store about, oh, it could be like this. And then we somehow construct it and then say, hey, can you hold this for me? And then the computer holds it and maybe combines it in new ways and says, oh, I see this pattern. What do you think you want to do something with this pattern? So it's like a back and forth. But anyway, the biology,
yeah.
that's the Moniac and the flow state. So there is something about this governance and flow systems.
Yeah, there's a lot there in what you just said. Going back to Dodson, I was very surprised when you told me that he was into psychical. I mean, I'm not a very well read
It's
person,
not
but I was
known.
like,
People don't. I mean, Arthur Balfour was the president of it, and he was the prime minister of England, who essentially set up Israel. These are pretty important people who are exploring these ideas 100 years, 150 years ago.
yeah, and this idea that there's a connection between like mathematical discovery and like psychic stuff. This is a kind of relatively new thing that I was thinking about, but I think if it's true, then you could sort of say, okay, what parts of math are like are closer to this? And I do think there's something to do with this E8 or these exceptional structures, which maybe I don't know if there's some very fundamental structures and the
Hmm.
universe is set up so that things are working in a more kind of magical way, then a lot of people think. And I guess it kind of stands to reason that as one thinks more about these things like E8 or whatever, that there would be some kind of a connection there. And when I think about this Moniac, I've never felt like I understood economics very well. And I think that, when the guy designed the Moniac, computing itself was in its infancy, analog computing was its infancy, the understanding of economics, and yet he's some guy somehow managed to put all these things together and literally build the thing. I mean, you could say that that's just a great leap of ordinary creativity, but I'm kind of starting to think maybe there's something a bit
well,
more.
and sometimes maybe it's there because there's maybe just 5 or 6 operational ones left. They didn't make lots of them. The original one, I think, is in Leeds, which is not far from where you are in the business school, right? That's the original one.
Right.
And there's one in New Zealand that they've kept working. And so occasionally they do a demonstration once a year of how it actually works. And the other thing is there's this group, it's a consulting firm. It's called Cynefin, which is a Welsh term. This guy, Dave Snowden, is very big in complexity theory and like consulting and all sorts of high-level government work. They have something called estuarine framework or estuarine mapping. And an estuary is where fresh water meets salt water. And it's tidal. And the tide will make the water, the proportionality of it's, brackish of salt and fresh go up and down or move during the course of different cycles,
right?
Different cycles of the day, different tide levels, different seasonal cycles. And to me, and he's a very connected individual. He's a very high level thinker in the space. And if you imagine that combined with this Moniac idea of perhaps dimensionality interfacing. If our 3D space-time reality is, say, the salt water or the fresh water, the smaller bit flowing into the ocean, there's this commingling. There's a point at which it commingles, and maybe at different times of the year, there's different salt densities or whatever. It would be a dynamic system. And so the other piece of this is that the 2 guys who developed the field of ecology, and my friend Leo Saraceno had ended up researching this quite extensively. The entire environmental and ecological movement in the United States was essentially birthed out of the Atomic Energy Commission. Which is kind of wild to think about. The pendulum is swinging back towards nuclear power is green, the narrative structure. For a while, we're like, no, the green people, the environmentalists would be like, we're for nuclear. And now it's sort of swinging back. Well, maybe it's green. I don't think any of them would realize that the entire ecological movement came out of the Atomic Energy Commission and Oak Ridge National Labs and the Manhattan Project. And so the 2 brothers, Hugh...
Yeah, even though I've known you for quite a while and I sort of trusting you quite a bit, I still have difficulty accepting that.
Yeah, well, the Odom brothers, Howard and Eugene Odom. And so they were out at Bikini Atoll when they dropped the hydrogen bomb to study coral reefs. And so then we've got the fractal recursive nesting. And then one of them, I can't remember which is which, but he was a signals intelligence during World War II on Puerto Rico, and then they went back and took a big box of nuclear radiation on El Yunque, the sacred mountain there. So there's this very interesting thing about radiation and ecology, and I can't remember which one of them went to Yale, and he studied under a man called Evelyn Hutchinson, who was British, and he was part of the circle of people who were getting early radioactive isotopes from the cyclotron in Berkeley, California. And so what he was doing while he was a professor at Yale was dropping radioactive isotopes in a pond to study liminology, like liminal, essentially energy transfer through living systems in this pond, using the radiation to say the energy goes from this place to this place, or this eats this and this eats that, and it decomposes this way. And so they were kind of making a Moniac, an economic...
kind of like radioactive dye or something?
Yes, a tracing. It's a tracer. Yeah, and so they were using the radioactive isotopes as a tracer, essentially to sort of use a pond as a Moniac, only it wasn't in a box in a business school, it was just a pond. And so this was in the 50s or 60s again, a long time ago, but we don't talk about it. And Evelyn Hutchinson was a translator, but only selective bits of Vladimir Vernadsky's book on biogeochemistry. And he was Russian, and Vernadsky came up with the idea of a biosphere, how all of everything interconnects. And he was working in the Curie lab in Paris. And both Marie and Pierre Curie were members of the Society for Psychical Research. And so,
Oh, okay,
so if
we've
you,
come full
yeah,
circle.
so
Yeah.
it comes full circle. And then one brother worked at University of Georgia or Georgia Tech with connections to Savannah Research Lab, which is Department of Energy, and South Carolina Georgia border, which is a wetland and a swamp. The other one was working in Florida on freshwater springs in Florida. And he actually developed a whole equation about energy exchange and energy flow systems. And so my sense is, again, from an outside non-science perspective, is that there's a flow state of information, that there is more than just this reality as we perceive it. I think most people
Yeah.
would understand if you tried to inhabit the experience of a dog or a fly, you would know the information that's incoming to your senses is different. So that even in this 3D space-time, different agents have different slices of how they can perceive things based on their sensory equipment. Knowing that, you have to know that there must be higher dimensional spaces. Mathematically, you guys work in higher dimensional spaces, right? Tesseract and fourth dimensions and things. It has to, some of it
Yeah.
is needed to make the math work. So there's
Yeah.
something else out there. And then if how it goes back and forth would seem to be a flow, and you would seem to need a gate or a door or something that would either like
Exactly.
open the
Yeah.
gate or close the gate.
It's this idea of flow and openness in the systems. I've been doing mostly math research jobs for the last 20 years. Some of it's supposed to be applied to things in biology or engineering and things, but it's surprised me how much people like to think about closed systems as opposed to open things. For example, a lot of people, when you think about some kind of dynamical system that's going to change, they basically just think of something that's completely sort of closed off. It's just like, okay, this always goes to this always goes to this always goes to this. And the thing will always run the same way. And it's just kind of like a movie. If you think the universe is like this, the universe is just like a movie that you just press play and step back and don't do anything. And I mean, it's a kind of, I don't know if it's disempowering or if it's good to study or what it is, but I don't think it's a very good way of looking at a lot of systems. But what you're talking about with these lakes or these flow systems or estuaries or, any of those, you've always got some kind of input from the outside and some way of outputting, and then some kind of a flow of information.
And the estuary goes both ways because of the tide. The river tends to run one direction unless there's a hurricane or something backing it up. Like it's going to go straight. But then when you get closer to the ocean, that's where you get that liminal space. I think the play space is in that liminal zone. How do we navigate the salt content of the brackish water? How do we work in that space? Because it feels like in some ways the ocean would be the expanse. There's a containment where a river is in a bank, right? We have a structure, we have a body, we have a perceived identity. Like we're objects, but then the ocean is kind of, it's just so big. How does the ocean talk to the rivers? The lens that I'm currently holding is that I think there can be different frames and you can look at the same information and tell different stories about it depending on your experience and value systems or what you weight or what you forward. And I kind of can sort of see correspondences between them, and I don't feel the need to say like, no, it's definitely this and not that, or this. I can kind of see that there's takeaways from bits. And so when I saw the E8, it was around the time, or maybe it was from something about Stephen Wolfram's and the idea of the Rulliad. Can you, like, it's sort of like all the computation, right? The Rulliad is like everything computation that could be made sort of thing. Is that,
I mean, I used to be pretty obsessed with Stephen Wolfram's work about 20 years ago. No, maybe, 10 years ago, maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago. I got so into it, and then I was like, okay, no more Stephen Wolfram, because I don't want to get distracted. So since you started talking about the Rulliad, I've never really looked, but he used to talk about the sort of computational universe, or the universe of all these computer programs, and it's a really interesting idea. I really like these sort of paradigm shifting kind of ideas, which are like, okay, maybe reality works totally differently to what most people think it does. And I think what Stephen Wolfram was doing sort of 20 odd years ago was most people, when they write computer programs, they think what they want to happen first, and then I'm going to write a loop or some program to make that happen. But he's like, okay, what if we just look at the very simplest programs and just run them all and just see what they do? And if you do that, you find there's all sorts of crazy mathematical patterns that are just generated out of the things you find in the wild.
Uh-huh.
In the universe of computer
Yeah.
programs are absolutely wild, absolutely
That's like a
crazy.
jungle, like an ecosystem.
Exactly. And some of these programs, I mean, I think they probably, I mean, and this is something that my colleagues probably wouldn't agree with, but I think some of them are probably alive in some sense,
But
or
see, the
they,
thing is, they could have a different kind of existence in a higher dimension.
right.
Or they could be a bridge into a higher dimension. When the Levin group, when they say, oh, maybe ideas have people, the idea of, well, let's fight about where calculus came from, Newton or Leibniz. Well, maybe it was looking for a substrate. My friend Laura sent me a film saying, maybe there's a thought form or a concept or a beingness or a structure or a pattern that is looking to travel into this particular way reality experience. And so it's looking to how it can come in, and it's sort of look like an ambassador. And this links to this guy David Rugg, who was talking about this liminal web based on Tyson Yunkaporta's indigenous work around storytelling and around a fire, and that different people would be ambassadors for different stories, and then you would collectively tell them, which is an open system. And so each time it was told in a different group with a different audience, there were similarities, but every time the story was told, it would be a little bit different. So it was a
Yeah.
dynamic system, and people were there representing ideas and stories. And so if you imagine that there may be another informational space where computer and Levin talks about sorting algorithms, maybe like having choice and being able to redirect even something as basic as a sorting algorithm, that it has a certain intelligence, a certain resiliency. If you tell it to do a thing and then you put an obstacle, eventually it finds a workaround, even though it's a sorting algorithm. And so if you imagine that maybe we just don't have a vocabulary for what agency is in all these other dimensions. And
Absolutely.
that, right? Because we don't have a language for it. Now we sit around and we fight about whether or not computers are conscious, because that's the only words we have. We have words. It's
Absolutely.
like, is it have a soul? Is it conscious? And I'm like, well, what if there's a whole other vocabulary that we don't know yet, that is a way deeper, richer palette to talk about it? And the things that Wolfram was discovering are the mathematical programs that they inhabit another layer that's no less real than our layer. We just don't have a very good interface yet.
I'll be back in 1 minute. I
Yeah.
want to go and get my new kind of science book. It'll
Okay,
be
all
easier
right.
to, if I can show.
Yeah.
This this is the book that he wrote.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the reasons I got so interested in it, is because I've sort of had this intuition for most of my life, really, that this idea that humans are like the only intelligent species on the planet, or nature is mute, or all of this, it all just seems like such a load of BS to me. And it was really nice to see somebody bringing a lot of very, very concrete mathematical things that really make that kind of idea look sort of a bit silly. And one of the things that he does in the book, I'm not sure if I can illustrate it, but it's like, you imagine time is going downwards.
Uh-huh.
So you start off, everything's white except one thing is black, and then you've got some rules. I'm not sure if you can.
Uh-huh.
So those rules are saying what color the middle cell should change to based on its surroundings. And so here you start off with this little black cell, and you've got these simple rules, and you get this nice fancy pattern
Wow, it's
that
beautiful.
emerges.
Mhm.
So it's kind of pretty, but from a complexity point of view, we might not be that impressed, because we can, with our fancy brains, we can sort of guess what's going to happen next.
Okay.
But then we find stuff like this. Where
Oh, okay.
we only just change the rule a tiny bit, and it's the same kind of thing. And there's absolutely no complexity that we're putting in, just one black dot and simple rules. And so we run it and we go, okay, how can it make all this craziness out of nothing? Surely if we run it for longer, we'll understand, oh, it's going to... No, it's completely, it just goes on and on. And what Wolfram concluded from studying this was something that's so... he basically has... it might even be too far out there for... basically this idea of this principle of computational equivalence, which is saying that you have things that are simple and we can understand them.
Right.
And then you've got things that are more complicated like this that we can't understand. But what he's saying is that these things that are more complicated, almost all of them are of equivalent complexity in some sense.
Okay.
So, in other words, if you've got some problem in science, if you can figure it out straight away or pretty fast, that's great. Otherwise, it's probably as complicated as anything else. So, it's a difficult thing to talk about exactly. I don't think it's been formulated exactly, but the idea would be something like, well, if you're looking at like a waterfall and you're looking at like the turbulent patterns of the flow,
Right.
why is it that we can't predict that? Probably it's equivalent of sophistication to the computations that are happening in our brains. And if
Okay.
you start thinking of along those lines, then it kind of gives more license to like animist style thinking
Yeah.
and sort of pantheism or this kind of stuff. The weather has a mind of its own. Well, maybe the weather is doing mind level sophistication
I
computation.
love that clip that you sent about the fog being alive with all the microbial stuff. That was
Oh,
really
the
great.
fog is alive as well.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, no, but it was microbes. And then they were doing their own ecosystem living in the fog, which is very interesting because I need to figure out if the rainforests of Costa Rica have fog. That's this whole center of the tokenization and the carbon trading and cloud forests and things like that. And so I have to see if there's a cloud forest in Costa Rica because it could be an ecological reservoir computing system, a fog and a cloud in the clouds. It is its own biological processing complex system. Nested fractals, right? Ecosystems within ecosystems within ecosystems.
Yeah. So it's like this question of, how sophisticated are these natural computations? And the older I get, the more I think there's more and more evidence that they're as sophisticated.
Well, it was complicated enough for Evelyn Hutchinson to dump some radioactive isotopes in the water and try to figure it out, or for the Odom brothers to be on that boat at Bikini Atoll to see what the coral did with the radiation.
Right, exactly. These people weren't just like, okay, we already understand this, let's just go on to something else. They're like, okay, we need to like probe these things because we don't understand them. And
it's almost like an alien intelligence that's already here. It's just alien because we can't see it. We don't have a lens to properly understand its own intelligence. When I originally reached out to you, the connection was I was looking at the category theory. Well, first I came in through projective geometry because my friend Laura and we were looking at the I don't know if you pronounce it, the Thoth or Thoth Tarot, which, and I know this is like going to push buttons for people. It's the Aleister Crowley tarot deck. The woman who did the actual paintings in collaboration, I think Crowley was mostly out of it by that point. Her name was Lady Frida Harris, and she learned projective geometry from Olive Witcher.
Olivia Witcher,
and George Adams Kaufman, and they were anthroposophists who were translating a lot of Steiner's work into English and specifically studying the geometry parts of it. They spun off of anthroposophy and set up their own institute around Goethe, which brings in again color theory and morphic fields into the mix with Steiner. Then I think sharing on the campus of this Goethe Foundation, or the Goethe Sciences Institute in Britain, is I think Emerson College. I think they're co-located, and Keith Critchlow, who was amazingly brilliant architect and studying of geometry, a geometer and architect, worked with Buckminster Fuller, but specialized in Islamic
Critchlow, he wrote that book on the
flower
geometry. I mean, that is next level, really. In this Stephen Wolfram book, Stephen Wolfram's running all these programs. There's a chapter where he's like systems in nature. I'll see if I can find it.
The thing about Critchlow too, so he studied Islamic architecture and also mystical Islam and the Sufism, the Persian Sufism, which I had come to through Henri Corbin and his work with Jung in depth psychology. But it's really interesting to get the point of archetype and pattern and story and geometry and structure and possibly these lattices or these exceptional groups could all be the same thing, but people are using different stories to talk about it. In my opinion, what Wolfram has is he is using a lens because of the person he is. It's computational, but you could easily look at it through the lens of Persian Sufism and say that the structure of this divine object that contains all of the lattices of the that can reflect the light and create versions of reality is the beloved. And so in this Islamic
Yes.
version, the being that is at the core isn't a computer or isn't a certain system. It is actually personalized to someone that you love, and that they see themselves through
Ah.
your eyes. And so to me, that opens up the conversational part.
Oh,
He describes it as the beloved. I mean, generally it's a man to a woman, but you could frame it as the goddess. You could frame the different stories, but a loved one. There's a supreme, divine, loved one. And that,
oh, a
but that,
supreme one. So you're
yes,
not
yeah.
supposed to project it on someone you.
There's a loving relationship as opposed
Yeah.
to simply a computational. And I'm not saying one is right and one
Yeah.
is wrong. It's just they're kind of going about similar paths and
Yeah.
arriving in different stories.
This is it. One of things that impressed me quite a lot in this Stephen Wolfram book
Oh,
is
yeah.
stuff like this. So
Okay.
on one side he's got actual leaves, and then on the other side he's got these kind of patterns, sort of sticks and dots, that you make by some computer procedure, and then some simple procedure, and then he's like, oh, isn't it interesting that we find these leaf patterns? And I mean, it's fascinating.
And
But,
Critchlow was
I
making
mean,
that connection
exactly.
as well.
If you look at what Critchlow's doing, that book, what's the book called?
The Hidden Geometry of Flowers, Living
Right.
Rhythms, Form and Number. So,
I mean, to me, it's kind of like he's done what Stephen Wolfram's trying to do, but he's done it exactly, and he's done it using straight edge and compass, probably in his mind instead of on a
well,
program.
and maybe there's like a bridge. Maybe the future of how this next level of conversation happens is analog, which is biological, like the flowers or us appreciating the flowers. But then there's an aspect of the computational that does what computation does, which if you get at the core, if the mind of the computer is a crystal, you could understand it as an extension of mineral intelligence, our current
Yeah.
computational systems. Now I think it is going more towards biological computation, but it's this back and forth. So they could both have their relevance. They're not exclusive of one another. One does one thing and one does another thing. And so the other piece of this is Critchlow was a tutor to Prince Charles's sons. It's interesting that you have, I mean, and I'm sure he's brilliant and he would be a great person to be a tutor, but it's interesting that in 20th century that the focus of the royal family would be on having a geometer instruct next generation of governance by geometry. A lot of this work that's melding cutting edge technology with ancient shamanic wisdom practices and the blending of religion or spirituality and physics and markets is underwritten by the Templeton Foundation. And John Templeton, he was early on in mutual funds. And if you understood maybe the economics as a language, an interdimensional energy language, he gave up his citizenship in the 80s and moved to the Bahamas and became a British citizen. And he was knighted by the Queen for his service. And so if you start to link in with Moniac and fluid analogies and British royalty and geometry and interdimensional, I mean, it kind of goes back to John Dee and the angles in the angels. If there's an aspect of people are like, oh, well, he was an occultist or this or that. Well, maybe he was someone who had an access to higher level physics or math, but the language of the time afforded only a certain kind of word, so it was framed within magic because that's how it was understood. But perhaps he was in contact with patterns, these structural patterns
Do
of
you
the
think
universe.
you could flick through, show the people? Because I mean, for me,
some of the pictures. I don't know. Here's some diagram. There's structures that he makes out of the flowers. So
yeah, there's so many
fractals.
pages where there's an actual flower on one side, and
Okay,
then
let me see if I
there's
can find.
straight edge. I mean, there's like a straight edge and compass construction on the other.
Yeah, like these maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, you could say he's doing something similar to Wolfram, maybe, but he's like running through thousands of programs in his subconscious.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the
Because
right
we're
one that
quantum, like
connects with this.
Yeah.
Right, but maybe it's something more mystical than that. He's somehow able to like look at the flowers and somehow get some kind of communication from them
Well,
and find
and that's
out
what's so neat because I landed here in Hot Springs and one of the anchor people in the community used to be in nuclear medicine and is now doing flower essences. I mean, it's an interesting pattern. This person does flower essences, and I've learned a lot. And your background growing up was in a rural agricultural setting. You had exposure, and then I was in a city, but I worked in the oldest botanic garden in North America. And then now I've come here, and then I have my garden, which is kind of my complexity lab. I didn't appreciate it at the time. I just said, I'm going to go make my corner of the world beautiful. But I think at a higher dimensional level, it's a co-creation with these structures. And so when I found out about Finthorn, and that they said, well, how am I supposed to make a garden on a Scottish rocky beach? And they said, talk to the devas. Well, I mean, what if the devas are those patterns in the Wolfram book? Only Wolfram imagines them with a certain language set, and the Finthorn people imagine them as devas or fairies. And it's just because we're limited by our language. I mean, not limited,
I
but
think so.
the language we use shapes the stories we can tell.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, exactly. And it has a lot to do with what kind of picture of reality we expect there to be, in a way. For quite a long time, like I say, I got kind of indoctrinated by the Wolfram stuff, and he has this kind of idea that, well, maybe at the base of it, the universe is some kind of like a network of things that are connected together, and then there's maybe some sort of pretty well-defined rewrite rules that say, oh, if you see a triangle, replace it with a shape like that, or whatever, and somehow it's just like a load of sort of connectivity structure, topological structure that's changing according to some definite rules, and that makes everything that we see. And again, it's this kind of idea that, well, basically the universe is kind of like a video or something. If you know the initial condition and you know the rules, that's all there is to it, and we can all go home. If one says, okay, the observer is actually like a thing that can't be reduced. Where do our emotions come from, or where do our will come from, or our decisions? Or if one doesn't negate these things and say that they're illusions, and then one asks, okay, what's a nice theory of reality? It would have to contain all that stuff. And in thinking
but
about
that's kind of the laminated space-time. Edward Dewey, in the Foundation for the Study of Cycles, he studied all of these cycles of obvious ones like agriculture or money, but also emotion and in different aspects of our thought forms. And he was doing this pre-computer. And it was very thorough. I mean, you can still get the book on archive.org, Study of Cycles, I think it's called. And he said that there are regular periodicities. Harmonics has a geometric element, right? You could translate a periodicity to a structure. Could you do that?
All sorts of structures will have their own natural harmonics.
Okay.
Right? So if you wanted to talk about particular waves and things, you could set up structures to make them. I mean, the whole study of harmonics and waves and things is like one of the many parts of maths that I'm not an expert in. Particularly,
theoretically,
it's the trough in the wave.
Yeah. And what Dewey was saying is that you could harmonize different periodicities. You could bring different waveforms together in different ways. The frame I like is more the mystical, that there is a divine source that is, if not infinite, close to infinite. There's the source of all, but how we interact with it is dynamic and participatory. And probably at the higher level, the communication is a waveform. Whether it's a wave of light or a wave of sound, or some sort of like a photonic. It's a wave, and so there's harmonics in it, and then how the harmonics, whether it ends up being a holographic projection, but a dynamic holographic projection, it's like coming through the mirrors and arriving here. But I think there's a two-way conversation happening, that in my story, it's not simply we're just following the movie. It's more this transmedia storytelling, which is nonlinear. And the thing I do like about Wolfram is the branchial space. The Ruliad is that, unlike the Hugh Everett infinitely branching trees, that once you make a choice, it goes infinitely on forever and it never can jump back. I like that the Ruliad braids, and it feels like it connects to knot theory and some of these other aspects of things separating. Maybe you've got a river that splits, and then it comes back together around the island.
Yeah. Yeah, and this relates to something we've been talking about a bit, I guess, which is these category theory things, really. These sort of string diagrams and things like
You
that.
want,
So,
you want me to show the Noemi Spicer book? Can
oh
I
yeah,
show
yeah,
the?
yeah.
Yeah. So my friend Russ introduced me to this book, and it's called the Manual of Braiding. And I did know a bit about knot theory. I mean, I don't really know it, I know of it. But in this book, so this woman was Swiss, and her father was an anthropologist or a museum director, and she ended up being really fascinated by textile history and taking apart braids. And my friend is working in this idea of apparel and fabric, and that a weaving is only warp and weft. And so you're
Yeah.
either at the beginning, you're either the thing, the warp or the weft. But in a braid, on either one, you can be the thing that's wrapped around or the thing that's wrapping around. So it's very
Yes.
dynamic. And we looked at some of these and we were like, oh my gosh, these look like math equations. I mean, they literally look like these diagrams, math or physics. And some of them actually
Yeah,
involved
I mean,
people
that
holding
book is
strings
like
like maypoles. Oh,
fascinating for a mathematician.
here's the people dancing around and making the knots. And so if you imagine us as agents, right, or societies as having hollands and being agents and then moving in certain ways or being guided through governance systems or economic systems, what are we building? And it may be at a higher level that we can't quite even see what we're building while we're building it, unless we can come up with a way to step out and bracket and have a look. And I forgot to bring in Templeton is with the physics and the religion and the free markets and the character, which would be like archetype, is underwriting a lot of this innovative work in researching of knitting all of these things together. Like Levin's working in Kathmandu with Richard Watson, and there's lots and lots of money going into it. Maybe someone is trying to figure out a new language or revive practices that we've forgotten because we've moved into a particularly techne-focused version, and to restore a bridge back into these other informational spaces to have a way that we can enrich our lives. But then we need
Yes.
to actually take responsibility for helping build it out, and so that we end up with a governance structure that's truly collaborative, meaningful. And I think it can be done. I mean, I think that's part of the work that we are here to do, is to say, yes, it has to be done, but it's an equal responsibility of the people to learn it or to help build it out at the same time. You
Yeah.
can't just sit back until someone else does it, because then it's someone else's thing. So we all have to build it together, but we have to know that it's possible. And part of that is understanding our agency and our relationship to higher dimensional structures, whether you want to understand it primarily as math or harmonics or music or art or dreams or other. There are many ways to tell that story that I think one doesn't have to preclude the other.
Yeah.
And if we built the richest bridge across, it would involve all of those things. And so how do we have a governance, a playful governance system that can do that? And it's exciting. I think it's super fun to think about.
Yeah, yeah, and I kind of like this idea that even though I'm a mathematician, I kind of like this idea that at some level, maybe at some like high enough level, the details of the math maybe don't really matter. That it's more about somehow there's some math that makes it work,
Yeah.
and it doesn't really matter what it is. If you're writing a story and you're writing a story about someone who has to go on a spaceship from somewhere to somewhere else, you don't have to like understand all the details of how the drive works and how much fuel there is and all the rest of it. And I kind of think maybe in my life, I kind of feel like the universe is saying, okay, yeah, there is this math available here, and somehow it's just there. And but in my journey, like I was doing math for about 10 years before I discovered category theory. And then when I discovered category theory, which is a branch of maths, I was like, oh my God, this is so much more powerful than a lot of the other stuff that I was looking at. And it seems to provide, you were just showing that book with the weaving pictures. And one of the most lovely things about the category theory is that there's a way of reading it in a very picture-based kind of way, which is, it's completely translatable with things like knot theory. I mean, these ideas basically that you have sort of wires where you can think about maybe information flowing in, and then you can do things to them. Maybe you copy the information here, and then with a black dot means copy, and then the white dot means add. So you could put a 3 in here, and then you've got 2 copies of the 3 and you add them. And you can just instantly start making all sorts of, this one would take in an input and copy it once and copy it again. And you can instantly start just having like this visual language, which can talk about the same things that people talk about nowadays with algebra, but there's this new way of doing it, which, you know, maybe over the last few years, people were starting teaching it in places like Oxford and things, but now it's sort of spreading, and there's people like me trying to popularize this stuff across the internet and get more people into it. But at the end of the day, I think what it's sort of boiling down to is that there are these shapes, things that can braid round each other, and maybe things like that in higher dimensions, but they're kind of like natural, kind of branchial structures, which probably are the real kind of music that most algebra is just like sheet music that doesn't mean much unless you have gone through all this fancy training. But we can find the actual thought forms, or hopefully we can, and I think it's very exciting.
It is cool.
But yeah.
Yeah, I'm imagining when you were talking about networks or units and assembling different structures and things, my inclination is that what's on the way is an evolution of systems, living systems, diverse systems, not just systems of people, but systems of environments, larger symbolic systems. And
evolution of them.
yeah, well, I mean, evolution is kind of, it's a little bit of a charged word. I don't mean it in a genetic sort of way. It's like becoming
kind of thing,
more sophisticated. The world tends to become more complex. And I say something about concrescence, the Whiteheadian stuff. So I really appreciate the work of Matthew Segal in making it accessible for regular folks. This idea of at any one point, we're just in the now, like you and me, like we're in this one now moment, right? And then the past. Yeah, so I was just saying about like this ingression of these eternal objects. And it's interesting because, again, that was Albert North Whitehead, and the 100th anniversary of his lectures at Harvard. He was British, but he taught at Harvard, was last year maybe? And it's interesting because when I was watching the live stream, the guy who introduced, was one of the introducers of the event. His name was, I think, Jay McDaniels, and he was an emeritus professor of religion at Hendrix College, and with a sort of an emphasis in Buddhist studies, which a lot of this economic system seems to go back to this Buddhist economics with Schumacher. But anyway, so he's at Hendrix College, and I thought, well, that's very odd because I know that name from somewhere, but I'm new to Arkansas, and it turns out that Hendrix College is an hour and a half away in Conway, and then we're talking the whole cellular automata stuff is like Conway's Game of Life, and so he's a professor in Conway.
One of the first.
Yeah, the Game of Life, and so in Conway, they've got this professor, and he's kind of he was carrying the mantle of John Cobb, who was the main Whitehead scholar for many years. And during his time at Hendrix College, they were developing a program in China on eco-civilization, which was linked to sustainability and will clearly be part of these tokens. And I think somehow the tokens are a language. They've got 30 centers for eco-civilization, and they were bringing Whitehead back into China as a way of sort of reintroducing Taoism and I think to a certain extent Confucianism via the West. They're reintroducing the origins of Chinese. I mean, they were working with the I Ching and the hexagrams. Like the hexagrams would be those objects, right? Those patterns in another space. But they're doing it through Whitehead to make it more acceptable, but also it will be linked to these tokens. And so if we imagine that, say, everyone individually is ingressing different things on their Conway's Game of Life, but we can work as a team collectively, possibly teamed humans, but also interspecies teaming. You know, you're in the woods now. You're on the team Woodlot, and Creek. And so there's like a team that everybody has different affordances and different, maybe you're an ambassador to different parts of the pattern in these higher fields. And the forest is around you and it has access to other different parts of the pattern, and you can make a composition, like you could compose it based on these higher dimensional mathematical or photonic structures based on an intentional focus. But I think somehow these networks related to systems evolution, systems complexity, complexification, and participatoriness, not just running the movie, but helping co make the movie, or as my friend Laura says, building backwards from the E8 towards each other, mutual co arising, which is part of this Buddhist systems, Joanna Macy's work, that it's coming together. We're coming together with intention, but we have to be coherent in our bodies and our hearts. It's a frequency. And so if we're working on harmonics, our hearts have to be in the right place, which is, why I appreciate working with you, Richard, because I feel like your heart is in the right place. And I think people that I work with think my heart is in the right place. And so we don't know exactly what we're doing, but we're doing the next right thing from our heart being in the right place, knowing that this complex system, we don't have total control, but we do have agency.
Yeah, I find this idea, I haven't read much about Whitehead, this idea of things ingressing, very interesting. I kind of, I definitely think it's got merit and it could be right. But I also think just, it kind of seems almost self-evident to me that there's probably, like, as I'm like stood here in this forest or whatever, I think I'm like in 3D and breathing air and there's like electromagnetic radiation, but there's probably all sorts of other aspects of my reality that are going on. Like maybe I'm in higher dimensional space, or maybe there's some kind of waves going through me that I've never noticed before, or things are connected up in a way that, so the idea that there's some kind of thing that somehow able to read my internal state and relate it to like the internal state of the tree or yourself or
but if we're all part of the all,
seems pretty rational.
I mean, if you could take it all the way back to the substrate basis of from which this dynamic composition happens, it would be like imagining you have sort of a semi-infinite orchestra of options, and they're all sort of emerging or popping out or doing their solo routines or their ensembles at different points. And so it seems to me, as a social system, if we can become more aware of it and be more focused and intentional, we may be able to construct more beautiful things.
I think so.
Yesterday we were talking a little bit about the boxes, and if there was a wormhole, it's very likely we're only exploring the tiniest sliver of what this is, which is what you're speaking to, that there's a lot of stuff we don't even have language or awareness of yet. But what if we're currently evolving in a cycle of this cosmic moment, that if you imagine the base reality as the divine beloved, and who can only know itself through others reflecting back at it, its aspects of itself, looking, eye gazing, right, to back into the divine, and the divine sees itself in the reflection in our eyes, then perhaps there's a whole other section of possibility space that is as yet not fully explored, but we actually have to develop new capacities to explore that space. And so we're in the moment of, whether it's math, whether it's ritual, whether it's performance, whether it's music, develop some sort of synesthetic, interdisciplinary way of knowing, so that we can go through that door and then show this divinity of the all a new facet of itself that isn't yet reflected. I don't know. It's an interesting story. I'm telling it as a story, but
it kind of makes sense with stuff like why it's important that there's coherence. I mean, I was just thinking about, if I hold this piece of wood with my hand, I get like a feeling in my nerve, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe like that nerve is like a little part of my body. Maybe we're probably tiny parts of some superorganism or something, but unless that nerve is cooperating well with the other parts of my body, it's going to have a hard time getting from something that's just happening in my finger to something that the entire Richard is aware of. This is why it's not exactly why, but it's part of the reason I'm really interested in like math education, by taking some of these ideas from category theory and focusing on how they can be represented with these pictures. Because I believe that we're coming into a new age where we're basically going to have picture-based languages for all sorts of things in mathematics, and that will hopefully allow more people to, like, more communication between, because I think there's some people at the moment that kind of feel like, well, there's this sort of group of people that are doing all these fancy things, and a lot of people feel locked out. And I think that's going to change if we are on the dawn of some kind of change where we recognize more consciously that we're part of a larger organism. I kind of feel like the sort of advances in communication that are coming because of the stuff I've been talking about and because of AI, etc., I think that might have a part to play in unlocking this understanding.
Yeah. And the other piece that I love is the topological aspect, or like the hyperbolic geometry, and also the homotopy IO. Is that when I was talking about gradients?
Homotopy IO is amazing. It can let anybody like draw these pictures in like high dimensions with no preparation. It's fantastic. But yeah, go on, Alison.
So it's sort of like those bead diagrams, right, with the lines, but it's more like forms. It has curvature, like a landscape.
Exactly. So it's like that string diagram I drew on the board, and also higher dimensional versions of those kind of things.
Right. And part of it is like, if people listen to me, they'll know for some reason the pointers that I get, pay attention to this. This is a thing, right? Is Neil Stephenson. And two of his books in the world, Reamd and Fall or Dodge in Hell, they focus on a video game that the main character has designed, a multiplayer video game. But the core element of this video game that distinguishes it is that it has unique financial plumbing. So we're talking about, again, flow state. In the story, it was about doing sort of crypto and in China and Chinese gold farmers and gaming. They specifically said plumbing is at the primary, and that the geology of the game, they found a specific person who understood how to mold the geology of the terrain, because the game is called T'(rain). And T actually is like the Tao, like the cross and the resurrection, and then rain, the flow state.
Right.
And the financial system was linked to the geology. And so if you mined, you would mine where there was real gold. It wasn't just in other games, it was just an outline in a shell. And so to me, and my background so strangely is this cultural landscape. My master's thesis professor said, you'll see it. One day you'll see it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'm realizing, and watching Andres Emilsson's work on the Qualia Research Institute and computational psychology, and in rendering qualia as a topological form. So they've got these grids and then hills. And so they're representing sort of the innate sensing aspect. What is it like to be Richard sitting under a tree in the woods? And there'll be a particular characteristic of that they kind of model computationally. And then there are other people who do sort of social science computation, and it tends to be hills. And even this Conrad Waddington's epigenetic landscape, it's hills with a ball, and then underneath the hills are levers, and you can push and pull them. And so you have a governance.
Right.
There's like a governance system to the topology. I keep in my head putting together game mechanics, economics, changing terrain, where the terrain could be consciousness or how we experience reality from a qualia point of view. And then it feels like what is needed to maybe work out the terrain better, or to create our optimal terrain, and for different people, it would be different kinds of environments, but we need a governance system to interact with these higher dimensional spaces, and it would be like a game. And so I just got back from a trip, and I read...
This is it. Like we can talk about what we think reality is, but we can also use these ideas and maybe make some kind of a game or something that can help stuff.
Yeah, make a more beautiful thing. And, even the Vesta House ladies that, one of their projects was called a beauty reserve. And it was technically, I think, somehow connected to a DAO. And I had all of these skepticisms about what these blockchain systems were. And again, I legit built a very scary story of what it was. And it's not that's, there's no truth in that, because I think there's some truth in that. But then I think there is, people would say, well, it's just the thing, it's how you use it. And I didn't want to believe that at the time, because I was really invested in the scary story. But now I'm more open to saying, okay, there could be some other version of this that I didn't understand at the time. So I'm going to be a big enough person to accept that maybe I didn't know the complete story and lean into the better option. And so I feel like the better option is somehow using our lived experience as humans. Not that humans are obsolete. To me, a diverse intelligence is like an ecosystem level. So we're not necessarily the only thing in the equation, but we are really important. Our lived experience is really vital, but we need a language to be able to work with the higher dimensional math and the topology, which is what you're saying from an educational standpoint. But I think it could look somewhat like Homotopy IO, but with a palette of color or form that it has gradients or has more
Yeah,
options, like more possibility in it, so that instead of saying yes, no, you could be like, this section of light green on the hill that's in the shadow behind, because the sun's behind a cloud and it looks like that. And how do we build up our complexity chops that we could use a language that would both help orient coordinates and manipulate or play with the terrain, but also really be detail oriented about the experience, like the personal experiences of individuals and groups.
exactly. Yeah. I guess at the moment, I think we're probably still in the early stages of this kind of, I don't know, calling it like a visual math revolution is probably too tame. It's probably more than that. But at the moment, it might look a bit like, okay, yeah, there's some weird diagrams that people can write instead of drawing some weird algebra. Like that doesn't really affect me very much. But as you say, I think we're going to come to a point eventually where these things are much more easy for people to interface with and meaning laden and all the rest of it. And I think that, yeah, I hope so at least. I really hope that, you know, there's going to be some way that we can all understand the same. And I think it just seems like it should be that way. Like, in it.
See, I think that's where the Holon idea comes in, is that if you're going to be coherent and authentic to yourself, and it, like, if you hold that as a core piece, and if you imagine that there's a divine source of the all that sees itself reflected in the eyes of the various agents that are in the different dimensional spaces reflecting back, that there isn't just one thing. There doesn't have to be one thing. I think a theory of everything implies that there is some one thing to be known. And I think it's more dynamic than that. So can we arrive at a place where people can authentically inhabit the story that is satisfying to them and hopefully allows them to use their gifts and brings them satisfaction without hurting other people, without harming the environment, so that you can be your most authentic self, not to the detriment of other systems. And then how to do that dance, knowing that all of it gets reflected back. And so we, in that way, then we unlock a lot of lost energy, because we don't have to keep convincing people that ours is the right version. We could just honor that we authentically have this version and others have their version, and you know, flowers have their version and trees have their version and a stream has its version and all the versions. And if we had a language that perhaps sometime we could inhabit temporarily other experiences, oh wow, that's an interesting, I would never have thought of it that way. I feel like, but there's a structure or a language that's needed for that.
Yeah, I think there's a language that's needed for it. And also, I mean, at least from the kind of community that I'm coming from, I think there's some kind of shift in thinking that's required. I mean, I'm in a bit of a minority of my colleagues but I mean, I think that like our belief of how reality is structured is really important. I kind of think that if we believe really strongly in like logic and like the idea that something's either going to be true or false, you know, like I'm either holding a stick or I'm not holding a stick, and there's nothing else, there's no other possibility. Yeah, that does kind of preclude some of the things that you were talking about. But in stuff like category theory, one can get abstract and one can start saying, okay, well, maybe there's a more general thing. Like you can do this with something called top-off theory. You can think about systems where maybe things aren't true or false. Maybe there are like 4 possibilities. It's or you know, maybe it's like yes, no, or maybe, or there's all sorts of other
Or what
kinds
kind
of
of
logic.
what about Pask? What kind of observer are
Right,
you?
exactly.
Right? Like nobody
Exactly.
talks about Gordon
So
Pask, but can we say what like
exactly.
initially Paul Pangaro, he saved his
Yeah,
archive.
that's what I was about to go on to. So like with the past stuff, I mean, you can tell people about past, but I was just going to say with his stuff, you can see that he's working with, or it seems to me that he's working with these systems where everyone can have their own truth. It's like normally if you have like a set of things, people like to sort of break it up into these sort of disjoint subsets. So you'd be like, okay, you're on the side that believes X and I'm on the side that believes not X. But you can also think about things where things are overlapping and it's like, okay, maybe there's some contradiction in some sense, but we don't have to fuss about that. We can just go with it. And I think that I kind of think that with more people, if more people experiment with alternative beliefs, and that sounds like a really weird way to put it, but what I mean is that quite a lot of stuff like category theory is like, okay, I'm willing to generalize the kind of structures I'm thinking about in a mathematical sense. I'm not only going to focus on flat space, I'll think about curved space, or I'll think about higher dimensions. But what about generalizing our belief systems? Instead of believing that things are true or false, I can experiment with believing that that's not the case. And I think we maybe have to go out there to find these games or setups so that we can make these structures where, like you say, it's not just like I'm right, you wrong, or I'm wrong, you right. It's that we can have multiple stories that we don't have to have like one definite idea of truth or stop kind of thing.
Right. Well, and some of that I think means that we need to be a little bit more mature about just our ego self. I mean that the ego, like being a being is important and having an orientation is important. I'm not just like, oh, we should just all turn into a puddle and mush together, but centering I'm me because I'm not you. There's a lot of things like I'm concerned about losing my world model. If I dabble in this, it will be thermodynamically expensive for me to change all these other things. And
yes.
I did a little video about improv. Try before you buy. Maybe you could try on an alternative belief, but you don't have to go all in on it, right? Like, but you might learn something during the trial phase. And so I just finished this book by T. Nguyen called The Score, How to Stop Playing Someone Else's Game. And he's a professor of game design at University of Utah. And a philosopher.
Yeah.
And very, very, very interesting thinker. And his premise is that games allow you agency and affordances. So when I was saying improv, it was like me being at the Renaissance Fair was an improv. But he's taking the Renaissance Fair version and distilling it down to tabletop games or different kinds of games that we play with one another, that you can inhabit different rules and different ways of being temporarily for a certain purpose. And then we can step back out into our real world. So it's like a state of exception to play a game. But then how do you play a game in a way that uplifts you and teaches you, gives you new useful experiences versus the mechanism of gaming that reduces things to metrics and then becomes narrow and dysfunctional.
I think this is really fascinating because I spent quite a long time as a game theory researcher. And kind of looking back on that now, I feel like the game theory I was doing was kind of disappointing. It was kind of like, we want people in this engineering system to do such a thing. Maybe we want them to tune into different channels in their wireless network so they don't congest. So it's kind of like people were deciding that they wanted people to act in a certain way and then designing a sort of game or governance structure to force that. But you were also telling me a few months ago, there's some kind of this thing where you can have like players, but they can like choose their own games or something. There was like a grid.
Oh yeah, that was the guy from the Santa Fe Institute, and it was cooperative gaming. And so that's, again, part of this token, social impact token stuff is gaming the commons. How do you create a game that allows people to strive, to work, to maybe have a certain level of discomfort in the effort of achieving a new skill or a new insight or something like that. And so I think I'm trying to remember. It was his name Seth Fry. He was at Santa Fe Institute. He's works with Joshua Tan, I think, on this MetaGov project. There are these other projects already happening about
Oh
meta
my God, it's
governance.
absolutely
Pouring. You got to stop.
right. No, it's Hail Mary. It's hailing.
You've got hail. It's sunning out. That's crazy.
It's the most insane weather you've ever seen in your life. Well, actually, maybe not. You're
I'm in Tornado Alley, so yeah.
Yeah. It's so crazy though, honestly. It looked like it was the sunniest day ever, and now it's hailing. I mean, I'm wondering whether there's going to be fish falling from the sky or frogs or God knows what. I'm going to have to run.
Yeah, okay.
It'll be entertaining for your viewers anyway.
Well, we'll sign off for
knocked
now.
Out by a golf ball size. This is probably the most dramatic video on your channel, maybe.
You're doing great. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll revisit later on the gaming.
This is kind of like a game, I guess. This is proof that I made it back.
Yeah,
alive.
proof of life. Proof of life. Yeah. So I'm not a gamer. I'm actually really not great at games. So my family would. Anyway, my kid always wanted me to be better at games. So now maybe this is my chance late in life to work on the game thing. But you had shared with me several times some videos of people who analyze like speed running and video games.
Yeah. I'm quite a speedrunning. In my spare time, I love to watch speedrunning videos and stuff. Yeah.
And it's like kind of hacking the game, finding the glitches.
Oh, it's fascinating. Yeah, you've got thousands of people trying to find a way to maybe just shave off a couple of seconds off some lap of Mario Kart or something. And then occasionally some genius will find some insane way of doing something in the game that you're not supposed to do that cuts off like 30 seconds or something. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, so I think we'll probably have another conversation a little bit more about some of the game theory and the governance stuff. There are efforts that have been made for quite a long time. I came across Joshua Tan, who was working in category theory with this guy Lippman at Harvard on a project called Seed, which is interesting. Really, seeds, in my opinion, are communicating with higher dimensions. Like I can't explain why my 6-foot-tall Nicotiana sylvestris plant came from a seed smaller than a poppy seed. It's not all in there.
Wow.
It's a resonant transmitter of how light can transform itself into a pattern. So you've got this piece of dust, and then it turns into a massive, 3-foot wide, 6-foot tall plant. So there's something very cool about all of that. When we're working on seeds and governance systems, the presentation I saw was essentially like smart contracts for shipping contracts of agricultural goods or something. And a lot of those games are set within a framework of climate apocalypse, or they're games set against some disaster scenario, right? That is all going to be bad. And so we have to all collectively play the game together or we're all going to die. And I don't like that game. And I'm fine if other people want to play that game. But if I'm going to use permaculture tokens to talk to a food forest, I'd rather set up a different kind of game that's more magical. And I think it's possible.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell people they can't play the climate apocalypse game with their carbon tokens, but I want to play a different game, or at least try. And I think that there's some aspect of in this gaming that maybe like speedrunning, people could collectively find ways of hacking games or getting into these wormhole secret places that play around with the structure. Like, okay, yes, there's a structure. Somebody's got a structure. Like, how do we play within and around it?
Yeah, I think so. And again, this idea of maybe like non-classical logic, if the game is just let's avoid this bad situation, or like chess, let's avoid the opponent beating me, then it becomes a fairly, it can be an interesting game, but it, in a sense, it's maybe less interesting than a game where it's like, okay, everyone has their own notion of truth to some degree, and people can expand out in all different directions and try and like make something that hasn't been stated before, rather than just
new stuff. Let's go find new stuff.
Yeah,
I like
exactly.
foraging. I'm a forager. Like, that's my team ability. I think that's where we can get to, thinking about building a gaming interface that we can get to that kind of place.
Yeah. And I think we all, indeed.
All right.
Indeed.
So you get a chance to dry off. So to be continued. And thank you, Richard, for your time. It was all good.
Thanks, Alison.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.